maybe before we get into calculators, and on general the topic on retiring on Bitcoin, it's such a popular one. It's one of the surprises how popular this topic is. But like if you think about it, it's pretty understandable why it's so popular. How do you look at retiring on Bitcoin?
Well, I mean, it really just comes down to the math, right? I know that's kind of an annoying thing for me to say, but yeah, I mean, I think if you are a Bitcoiner and if you're investing in Bitcoin and you believe in Bitcoin's continued growth, both, nominally just from a compound annual growth rate and return standpoint, but also just based on its adoption, its embrace, and its overall proliferation across the world, financial markets, investing, et cetera, then you can start to think about, well, okay, how much Bitcoin would I need to live the life that I want to live based on, well, what are my monthly living expenses, right? And then what's the growth of those expenses? And so it's easy to look at it, I guess, based on just some of the simple math. But then what I've integrated into this as well is also looking at, well, if I don't want to sell my Bitcoin to get the money that I need each year to live, well, then what does this look like for me to borrow those dollars, right? So I know, some people don't want to sell their Bitcoin. Other people are much more in favor of not taking leverage on your Bitcoin. So it's really, it's up to the individual. But the way I've developed the calculator is to look at a couple different scenarios of using your Bitcoin as collateral, borrowing against it to fund your lifestyle, and then showing what that looks like in two different LTVs, like a 30% LTV and a 50% LTV, just to keep it conservative.
Interesting. Loan to value means like, just explain this quickly to the people that haven't heard about that.
Yeah, so think of the loan as the actual amount of money that you borrowed, right? So the loan, if you took out $100,000 loan and you were at a 50% loan to value, then think of the value as the value of your assets, so your Bitcoin. So at a $100,000 loan using a 50% LTV, the amount of Bitcoin value you would have to have is $200,000 worth of Bitcoin value.
I also love that you wait. I'll just bring it up quickly so people can see it. In the, is that the right one? Yeah. In your calculator. So that's the retire on Bitcoin calculator. And you put in not only the monthly expenses, which I don't know, that's 2.5K. Maybe that's a good good starting point. And loan API. I don't know, like what can we put there, like
I
4%,
I
7%.
always use 10 I always use 10% just to make it easy and round.
Oh, yeah, true. And then this is, I think, is really interesting because you need to have kind of the how much your year over year expenses are increasing, basically the inflation rate, and how this is working. I don't know. It's hard to pick a number there because like inflation rate can really skyrocket. But also, if inflation rate skyrockets, your Bitcoin skyrockets with that. So it also does not really matter if you hold the asset. Yeah, it's like it highly depends, and I think that's what you also teased in before when you talked about Michael Saylor and the inflation rate, because it's like an individual thing for each and every one of the persons. If you don't have to pay for rent because I don't know, you're still young and live at home and the only expense you have is a Netflix subscription, yeah, like and your inflation rate doesn't really matter that much. But if you want to live in a nice house in a nice neighborhood and have kids and all of the expenses associated with that, your inflation rate can be quite high. that can be really troubling. What do you usually put in there?
I usually do 5%, and I do that just because, the increase could be because of just strictly inflation. Maybe your expenses are relatively static, but they are, being impacted by inflation. And, we can debate the actual inflation rate all day long. Some people say it's 10%, some people say it's CPI 2%. That's the whole point of this too, is to make it flexible. It's dynamic. You can model whatever you want and see what the outcomes are.
That's interesting. The CAGR is also an interesting one because obviously it changes a lot in the model depending on what CAGR you're using. And we have a lot of discussions on CAGR. For example, like Michael Saylor, I think he foresees in the next 21 years a CAGR of 28.9%, I think. So if you're going over the next 20 years with Michael Saylor's model, that's that. The power law model is actually not that far away from that. Maybe a little bit less bullish. I think like Paulus would be probably like around that here. And if you go with the hyper model, you have 38%. I mean, I think the last 5 years we had a CAGR of 55%. So this would be like something like that here, which would make the whole thing completely different to do that. And what can you explain to us what's going on here?
Yeah, and just for context, I mean, this is the V1 of this calculator. The site's getting like a UX update as well. So are some of the calculators. So some of this stuff might even look different by the time this is actually viewable. But so on the left you have the total number of Bitcoin required, and on the bottom you have the year. And so what you're looking at is, in order to borrow your monthly living expenses in an annualized fashion there, how much Bitcoin do you need to fund your lifestyle without or at that same LTV? Right? So as the amount of money that you are withdrawing and using to fund your lifestyle increases, it's typically going to start out increasing at a rate that's faster than the growth that you're seeing in your underlying Bitcoin stack. But eventually, if you believe that Bitcoin will grow at that rate, steadily over the course of this 20-year period, then eventually what happens is that amount of Bitcoin that you need peaks, because the underlying Bitcoin that, again, you're not ever selling, has eventually surpassed the amount, or I should say it has eventually surpassed the amount of what you're borrowing is no longer increasing your LTV. The amount you're borrowing is actually lowering your LTV. And that's why you see that at the beginning, it goes up and it peaks, but then it eventually starts coming down because the underlying Bitcoin itself has the compound interest has surpassed basically what you're borrowing against it.
So this is the amount of Bitcoin required to have locked up in collateralized loans to borrow against them. It's not the amount of Bitcoin that you should hold, because I don't know how to maybe you look differently at that topic, but I don't personally think you should borrow against your whole stack. I don't think that all of your stacks. So if you, in that example, you probably need around 2 Bitcoin at the height of it. So you need maybe to collateralize almost 2 Bitcoin at that point. If all you have is this 1.9 Bitcoin at the height of it, you probably shouldn't collateralize all of them, because there's also some risks with that. How do you look at that?
I totally agree. And this is really meant to show, if you wanted to retire today, how much total Bitcoin would you need throughout a 20-year period, to kind of show you, well, the maximum amount I would need at a 50% LTV would be 1.9 Bitcoin, but that wouldn't even happen until year 5. So that actually gives people some ways to think about, well, okay, I've now got 5 years to maybe get to that point. Maybe I could start doing this now, understanding that I've got some other income, other assets that I'm going to be converting into Bitcoin, so that by year 4 or 5, I've got, how much I need to continue doing this throughout the next 15 or 20 years.
So then it's like, if you have, let's say, 5 Bitcoin and you have this monthly expenses of 2,500 and you needed the height of it 1.9, you're like, okay, like there's some security to it. And you're like, okay, I might be able to retire. And I mean, this whole retirement topic is interesting, because I personally think, even if you retire, you probably will figure out a way to make income with just following what you really want to do. So I think if you, especially if you are not like 80 years old. Even if you're 80 years old, it's possible. But if you're like, let's say like 40, 50 years old and you retire tomorrow, you might get bored. I
Right.
heard that story from so many people. I've never was bored in my life, but I heard it from so many other people that said like, oh yeah, I kind of retired, and then I had so much time and I actually made a lot more money than I was making before, because I just built things that I really liked, and I didn't have the pressure of financial succession. And then it's like, yeah, I'll just made a profitable small business and make more money than before, because I now have the time to actually go ahead and do that. And that's the story of how it often goes. So this might just give you the confidence to pursue your own dream and not
Right.
actually retire.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think that's one of the benefits of investing in something like Bitcoin, where it has the ability to continue to grow and appreciate with time and give you, more assets with which to make decisions on how to live your life. And, that's really at the heart of a lot of these calculators too, is like, the big disclaimer on the homepage, it's not financial advice, it's just basic education, right? It's like, see what's possible, right? Open your mind a little bit to some of these other ideas that could maybe then, I don't know, give you ideas and give you inspiration on what you might do or how to do it or how to just think differently so that you're better prepared, better equipped to make some of these decisions that are, more in alignment with whatever your longer term goals might be. But you did say something that I didn't answer, but yeah, I mean, if you only need 2 Bitcoin to retire, but you've got 5 or 10, absolutely, right? I'm a big fan of cold storage. If you want something that's like multi-sig or whatever, go for it, right? Protect your assets at all costs. Leverage as little as you need to get the liquidity that funds your lifestyle and protect the rest. Absolutely.
I personally decided to not do any borrowing right now, just because I have income and I don't need to borrow and don't do those things. I just love having everything in self custody. But it's a nice option to have, and I think the products will also get better, because I still think that there's like this Saylor model of like he wants to have an issuance credit of more than 10 years, the duration of those credits, and then less than 10% of interest rates. And a lot of the products are like short term, like for 18 months, 2 years or something like that. And then like, how high are they? Like everything above 10%, I usually stay away from that, and get something below that. And I used some credit back in 2022, where it was like, I think 8 years and 4%, which was amazing to have. Those are days. Those no, and there was no borrowing, so it was just like a loan without like my Bitcoin at risk. Where it's like, yeah, it's almost a no-brainer, because I know Bitcoin in the next 8 years will outperform those 4% interest costs that I have, with like a very easy jump. And yeah, so I just want to put that disclaimer in, because a lot of people think they're doing the Sailor strategy, and then when you look at what Saylor actually is recommending with this longer than 10 years, lower than 10% of interest rates, a lot of people actually don't do the Saylor strategy, but it's fine.
Yeah. I mean, Sailor's a whole different animal, right? I mean, his expertise and acumen and the people and resources around him for all the financial engineering that he's doing is kind of on a different level. I think, when I talk to people about like living a Bitcoin standard, right? That's one of the calculators that I've built as well, is really helping people who are already pretty far down the Bitcoin path and understand Bitcoin. They understand, what Bitcoin does, the problems that it solves. And they've come to me and say, hey, I want to take that next step. Like, what are you doing to get more allocated to Bitcoin? Or how are you living on your Bitcoin and borrowing dollars to live your life? And at that point, yeah, it's a relevant conversation, but sure, it does require more tools, it requires more processes. There's probably more counterparties involved in that. And that's not for everybody, right? Some people do want true self sovereignty. They want self custody. They want multi sig, et cetera. They don't want to take leverage. And you know what? That's great. Those people are probably not going to be doing, the living a Bitcoin standard scenario, because again, that does require using your Bitcoin as collateral, borrowing against it to fund your lifestyle.
Thank you for watching this video. This was only a snippet of the podcast. And if you want to watch the full episode and get all of the context of this episode, you can click right here or here. Oh, maybe also here.